You're in the military summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 16th of June of 2026. Today we have a lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the conflict on the territory, where we see that the Russian offensive operation is gaining momentum, and we see that the Russian offensive operation intensifies. And according to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly along the line of combat contact. And first let's talk about the most important directions, and first let's talk about the Dobropolye area, where the Russians improved their position significantly around the settlement by the name of Belitskaya. During the previous 24 hours, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation stated that as a result of clashes, the Russians improved their position significantly through this area and the Russians captured the settlement of Novodonbass. The clashes for this village started around at the end of the 2025, and as you can see, the battle for this village took around 5 or even 6 months before the Russians were able to establish complete control over the territory. And currently the distance between edge positions of the armed force of the Russian Federation and the city of Dobropolye is already less than 3 kilometers. The Russians are getting closer and closer to the settlement of Dobropolye, but as of the current situation, the movement in the direction of the city of Dobropolye is not the primary target for Russians. Now the Russians are tasked just with one thing: to encircle the settlement of Belitskaya. The Ukrainians show fierce resistance through the settlement of Belitskaya. The battle for this city started during the same period when the Russians began fighting for the settlements of Pokrovsk and Mirnograd, so somewhere during the autumn of 2025, and yet the Russians haven't managed to establish complete control over the territory. And the problem is that the Ukrainians still have possibilities to supply the contingent of the territory of the city of Belitskaya through the villages to the south of the settlement of Dobropolye. But now the Russians, with control over the settlement of Novodonbass, have chances to establish FPV drone control over the main logistic lines and to reduce the number of support that Ukrainians are able to send to the direction of the settlement of Belitskaya. Furthermore, during the previous days, we started receiving updates that the Russians began improving their positions from the area of the settlement of Grishino further in the northern direction, and it seems that in coming days the Russians will answer the southern parts of the settlement of Shevchenko. This village is also very important because we still have reports that Ukrainians have positions through the territory of the Rodinskaya mine, which is located to the west of the settlement of Rodinskaya. So if Russians are able to answer the settlement of Shevchenko from the south, then the Russians would be able to cut supply and support of this territory. This will allow the Russians to maintain the lines and to begin offensive operation and to begin the major offensive operation in the direction of all these villages to the south of the settlement of Dobropolye. And this territory is a very important territory because if Russians are able to break through defenses of the armed forces of Ukraine through these villages, then the battle for the city of Dobropolye begins, and most likely the Russians will continue offensive operation in this area. But once again, first of all, the Russians will try to take under complete control the settlement of Belitskaya. As of the end of the 16th of June of 2026, we have reports that the Russians control somewhere between 5 and 10% of the settlement, but most likely from now on the territories, the Russians will improve their position. They will begin improving their position significantly. Now let's move to the second important area, and we are going to talk about the Drushkovka. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions both through the southwestern and the southeastern flanks. As of the settlement of Drushkovka itself, the Russians began reducing the city to ruins, trying to damage and destroy as many as possible the Ukrainian strongholds in this area. The Russians improved their positions through the southwestern parts of the Drushkovka direction, and these are the changes on the ground between the dates. So this is the end of the 15th of June of 2026, and this is the end of the 16th of June of 2026. The Russians are moving along the western and the eastern bank of the river of Kostiantynivka. As for the western bank, the Russians are moving along the river, and currently the clashes are taking place for this stronghold to the southwest of the settlement of Krasny Kut. As for the eastern bank of the river, the Russians are moving through the fields, and most likely likely the Russians are planning to attack in the direction of the settlement of Raiska with the purpose to cut logistics in the direction of the settlement of Nikolopolye. I would like to remind you that just yesterday Russians reported that as a result of clashes they established complete control over the settlement of Dovgaya Balka, and we have a video with dozens of flags that were raised by Russians through the entire Kostiantynivka direction. And now with the fall of the settlement of Dovgaya Balka and Raskoshne, the Russians would try to continue offensive operation in the direction of Nikolopolye, but now the Russians are tasked to cut the logistics before the battle for this village begins, and most likely the battle is going to start very soon. The distance between the edge positions of Russians in the southwestern direction from the settlement of Druzhkovka to the settlement of Druzhkovka itself is less than 8 kilometers, and the Russians continue advancing.
Man føler sig super velkommen, og jeg har købt rigtig mange biler mange forskellige steder. Det er ubetalt.
As for the southeastern direction, as for the city of Kostiantynivka, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians improved their position significantly. First of all, another day brought us another video with Russian flags raised through the city. Today, the group of forces south published another video where we can see at least 3 new flags raised through the city of Kostiantynivka, and all these episodes with Russian flags were recorded through the settlement and were geolocated. One of these flags was raised through this territory in the area of the northern Kostiantynivka citadel, in the area of the central market. Another flag was raised through the central part of the city on the territory of the Kostiantynivka chemical plant, and the third flag was raised through the most southern parts of the settlement. And today we start receiving reports that Ukrainians, according to media, retreats from the southern parts and the southwestern parts of the city, and currently the 81st quarter, a 92nd block, and the micro district of Metallurg is under complete control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. If this information is correct, then most likely tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation and the group of forces south will publish additional video about the flags raised in through this part of the city. So now, according to different sources, the Ukrainians control just 2 micro districts, the micro district of Chervony and the micro district of Novoselovka. But most likely, due to this configuration of the front line and due to the situation that the Russians continue improving their positions through these micro districts, we believe that most likely in 4 or 5 days the settlement of Kostiantynivka will fall completely in Russia's hands, and then the battle for the settlement of Alexeyevka-Druzhkovka begins. And the most important thing, we believe that the Russians are tasked not just to establish complete control over the city of Kostiantynivka. We believe that Russians are tasked to break through Ukraine's defenses in this area and to take the settlement of Alexeyevka-Druzhkovka as fast as possible. Because if the Russians are able to take this settlement as fast as possible, then of course this is going to be the biggest media defeat for Zelensky and for Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Syrsky, and this situation can lead to replacement of the Commander-in-Chief. But if it happens during the battle for the Druzhkovka-Slaviansk agglomeration, this can lead to entire collapse of this defense of the armed forces of Ukraine through the rest of the Donetsk region. So the battle for the settlement of Druzhkovka begins, and this is one of the most important battles of the special military operation. Another important area is the northern Slaviansk direction, where the Russians improved their position significantly. First of all, the Russians are about to finish the battle for the pocket to the east of the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal. Right before we started making this video, pro-Russian sources published a video with dozens of flags raised through these territories. So basically tomorrow, before the next update, we will adjust these territories, we will add flags through this area, and we will discuss the situation in this region. The Russians reported that this small village, this is a small Piskunovka village, was captured by Russians, and up to 3 or 4 flags were raised through this territory. But this report was published just before I started making this video, so we haven't added this video to the map and these geolocations. We will do this during the next hours, but one thing is clear, that the battle for this pocket is finishing. Furthermore, the Russians managed to deal significant damage to this territory, and this is the bridge. This is the logistic line that connects the city of Slaviansk with the city of Nikolaevka. And this video was published by pro-Ukrainian sources, and here we can see how Ukrainian soldiers were moving through this area. And here we can see that the main logistic lines were completely destroyed, and now the logistics in this area is very difficult. The Russians haven't managed to destroy the logistic completely, but now it needs more forces to rotate soldiers and to supply and support contingent to the east of the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal. All these updates tell us just about one thing, that the next village is the village of Alexandrovka. Probably 1 or 2 weeks and the settlement would be taken by Russians. Then it would take probably 3 or 4 weeks before the Russians finish the battle for the settlement of Nikolaevka, and probably somewhere by the end of July, somewhere at the beginning of August of 2026, the Russians would enter the eastern parts of the city of Slaviansk, and the battle for the Donbas Arc operation will begin.
Han er rask.
Har du haft basmanden op at stå?
Jo, ja.
Det er game over, det er blødt brød. TV2 Charlie herfra.
At the same time, the Russians continue improving their positions through the city of Lyman. During the previous 24 hours, the map, as you can see, has been adjusted significantly. This is the situation by the end of the 14th of June of 2026. This is the end of the 15th of June, and this is the end of the 16th of June of 2026. We have a video where we can see Russian soldiers moving through the settlement of Lyman through its eastern part. We have an episode where we can see a Russian soldier that was waving with the Russian flag in the most northern parts of the settlement, and we have a video published by pro-Ukrainian sources, and here we can see how Ukrainians were attacking positions of the armed force of the Russian Federation, basically in the central part of the city of Kostiantynivka. The author of this video claimed that the Ukrainians attacked a temporary deployment point of the armed force of the Russian Federation on the territory of this building. As a result of attack with FPV drone, this building was reduced to ruins. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map. So as we can see, the city of Lyman was cut into several pieces. The most eastern part, so this is the first microdisc, the first block of defense, the central part and the southwestern part. So there are 3 pieces, 3 small pieces of the city of Lyman, and now the Russians will handle with every single piece separately. But one thing is clear, that probably within the next 10-20 days the Russians will finish the battle for the city of Lyman, and the Russians will continue advancing further towards the river of Seversky Donetsk with the purpose to cross the river and to enter the most northern parts of the city of Slaviansk, and the battle for the Slaviansk will begin. So the situation is critical for the armed forces of Ukraine. The Ukrainians right now are trying to counterattack through other directions. We continue receiving reports about counterattacks of the armed forces of Ukraine through the Dnipropetrovsk direction. We continue receiving updates about counterattack through the northern Zaporozhye direction. We continue receiving reports about counterattacks through the central, through the south and Kupiansk or the Barova direction, but due to all these reports, we still haven't received anything that can confirm that indeed the Ukrainians are counterattacking through these territories. Probably one can say that these are just media counterattacks, just with the purpose to show that the situation is stable, but the Russian videos show that probably this is not the reality. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation through the Kupiansk direction. During the previous 12 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded. These are the changes between the 14th and the 16th of June of 2026. The Russians are about to establish complete control through the northern Kupiansk direction, and probably, not just probably, but most likely the Russians will cross the river of Oskol through the Kupiansk direction from the city of Kupiansk till the settlement of Sinkova. Most likely the Russians will do this, and of course if Russians cross the river of Oskol from this area, and if the group of forces west continue their offensive operation further in the western direction, then most likely the Russians will be able to re-establish complete control over the settlement of Izium. I would like to remind you that in 2022 the city of Izium was already under Russian control, but during the Kharkiv counter-offensive operation of the autumn of 2022 the Russians lost control over the city and were forced to fall back on the eastern bank of the rivers of Oskol, Zhiribets, and Nitrios. Now the Russians recapturing lost positions, and they continue this process. So the battle for the northern Slavyansk direction or for the southeastern Kharkiv direction is about to start as well. As for the Kharkiv area, during the previous 12 hours, we received lots of interesting updates. First of all, the Russians improved their position through the river of Volcha, and the Russians continue offensive operation further in the direction of the settlement of Bely Kolodys. The Russians decided to attack in the direction of the settlement of Bely Kolodys using broad frontline attack. The distance between edge positions of this offensive operation is already more than 24 kilometers, around 25 kilometers, and probably the Russians believe that the Ukrainians don't have enough of forces with FPV drones through the settlement of Bely Kolodys. And if Russians use lots of units for this offensive operation, basically the Ukrainians will not be able to stop the Russians due to shortage of FPV drone operators and drones through this territory. And this can work. This may work out, and we'll see what is going to happen next, because if the settlement of Bely Kolodys falls, this is going to be the beginning of complete collapse of the entire northeastern parts of the Kharkiv region. As for the northern direction, during the previous 12 hours, the Russians improved their positions through the settlement of Kazachia Lopan, and we have a video where we can see how the Ukrainians were attacking Russians through these parts of the settlement. The Russians continue advancing. Currently, the Russians control up to from 5 to 7% of the settlement of Kazachia Lopan, and the Russians continue their offensive operation. The Russians also continue their offensive operation through the Sumy direction. As of the end of the 16th of June of 2026, the main clashes are taking place for the settlement of Kondratovka. This is a very important village because this village is located along the road between the border and the settlement of Khotin. Now the Russians are tasked to create a buffer zone between this road and positions of the armored forces of Ukraine. The Russians most likely are going to use this road for the main logistics purposes. They will try to attack the settlement of Khotin. They will try to establish a strong logistic through this territory with the purpose to support the offensive operation towards the city of Sumy itself, which most likely is going to take place also during the summer of 2026.
Jeg må indrømme, jeg går efter udstillet. Jeg skal bare have en, der er lækker og godt pumpet, men også en, der er god for mig.
As you can see, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians have improved their position significantly through the entire line of combat contact, and the Russians published all these updates probably due to the current summit, G7 summit, that is currently taking place on the territory of France in the city of Paris. Leaders of the Western countries came with the purpose to discuss the next steps about Ukraine, about the settlement of the conflict on the territory of Ukraine. Lots of important statements were made by the President of the United States of America. Lots of important statements were made by Macron, by Zelensky regarding the future of the conflict on the territory of Ukraine. And we see that the European countries and the Western countries are going to increase the pressure on Russia with the purpose to force the Russians to accept the Western demands and basically to allow Ukraine to join both the NATO organization and the European Union. And without any resolution regarding the territories that are under complete control right now of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Also, during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians attacked the territory of the Russian Federation using hundreds of drones, and as a result of attack, a very important oil depot was destroyed on the territory of the city of Moscow. And here we can see how exactly the Ukrainians were attacking the capital of the Russian Federation. As a result of attack, the Moscow oil refinery was significantly damaged. Several sources reported that the Russians were forced to stop this oil refinery by the evening of the 16th of June of 2026. Furthermore, the sources reported that traffics around oil refineries in the area of the city of Moscow were recorded. People are buying oil, people are buying fuel, and this can lead to a small crisis through these territories. But one thing is clear, that most likely the Russians in coming days will carry out a retaliatory strike with the purpose to attack the city of Kiev once again and to create a similar situation. The Russians most most likely during the next massive attack will target gas stations, oil refineries, fuel depots, and fuel bases through the city of Kiev. Furthermore, the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, threatened the Russians that this upcoming winter is going to be very difficult for Russians. So this is the statement that was made by the president of Ukraine and by the Western and European leaders. Now let's switch some back and let's discuss the situation in Crimea and through the southern territories. According to information we have, the Ukrainians continue their process of establishing complete control over the logistics through these territories. We started receiving more updates that Ukrainians began attacking not just bridges but also trucks and vehicles with products that are moving along the existing lines and existing bridges. Furthermore, according to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians attacked the bridge along the M14 road, and the bridge was damaged significantly, as you can see. As a result of attacks, several holes were just recorded along the bridge, along the M14 road. Most likely, the Ukrainians will continue attacking bridges through the southern logistic line of Russia, but due to the fact that Ukrainians attack this bridge, I believe that the chances that the Russians in coming future are going to intensify their attacks along the bridges through the territory of Ukraine, and these chances are very high. So most likely during the summer military campaign, we'll see the Russians attacking and striking the bridges along the river of Dnipro, and these attacks may become a turning point in the conflict on the territory of Ukraine.